Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to a brand new installment in our reviewed and ranked series. Last week, we finished up the base roster of the game, and that is a pretty monumental achievement. However, there are still several characters to go through, and today we will be starting with the unlockable characters that come with the base game, starting with Elektra. And Elektra is a very interesting character, and she does have a lot to discuss and talk about. Of course, she shares a lot of common traits with characters that we have broken down and analyzed up to this point. So you'll see some familiar characteristics, but with very Elektra-ish twists on them. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about her, and before we do, make sure you check and see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not, go ahead and fix that real quick, as there's daily variety content coming to your subscription feed if you do. And if you're enjoying these videos, in particular the one for today, make sure that you leave a like, and that would greatly help me out. So Elektra has 9 different synergies which she can contribute to a team build. And they're a pretty varied amount of those synergies. She has 3 different synergies in the mastery category with Femme Fatales, Agile Fighters, and Marvel Knights. She has 1 Vitality synergy with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., 1 Defense synergy with Defenders, 3 Strength synergies with Anti-Heroes, Martial Artists, and Cutting Edge, and finally 1 Energy synergy with Women of Marvel. And from a team building standpoint, those are some pretty solid synergies to have. I particularly like the fact that she has 3 strength synergies and 3 mastery synergies, because those contribute a lot to in-game versatility and damage, because not only are you increasing the base strength of the team of characters that you've brought in, but you are also increasing the efficiency of the synergy attacks that you dole out amongst other members of the team as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about the synergies that we'll talk a little bit more about the abilities that Elektra brings to the table, but from just the standpoint of how she can enhance those types of attacks, she does quite well. So let's talk a little bit about the base functions of this character. Elektra has a 6-hit basic combo sequence in which all of these hits make direct contact with her opponent as she slashes out with her twin Psis. The 4th button press of that combo will execute hits 4 and 5 as she spins around twice, and will have a little bit of some extension onto either side of herself and hitting some opponents there, though of course the main target area is going to be directly in front of her, and then that last hit does have an amount of knockback to it, which will send the opponents reeling a little bit. And as always, these types of attacks are nice to see because it deters retaliation from the opponents as they're coming up to attack you directly. If they're grunt types, the mighty type enemies, of course, can shrug through that a little bit more easily, but it's not the end of the world. Elektra's heavy attack involves 2 strikes with, again, those Psis, but they are in a lot stronger of a fashion, and she lunges forward a considerable amount when doing so. And this heavy attack is nice for closing a lot of ground, but one of the things that is kind of unique to Elektra in particular, and we've seen this with a couple of other characters in the roster up until this point, is you can get a nice combo extension by opting to substitute the last hit of the basic attack combo for a heavy attack. That grants you an additional strike and some heavier hitting damage, especially for characters that might have been pushed back a little bit further with the standard strikes of your combo at that point. Either way, it does deter follow-ups from your opponents, and it's negligible in certain circumstances, but can certainly help with some minimal damage extension before you even look at the abilities that she has. Elektra does have a mid-air jump in which she will somersault. That's pretty consistent among the lighter, more nimble members of the cast that don't have an alternate method of traversal. And again, the double jumps are quite nice for navigating a lot of the traps and puzzles that pop up throughout the game as well. So a nice thing to note there for her. Elektra's falling aerial attack involves her plunging her Psis directly down into the ground. It doesn't cover a whole lot of area, but if you do land directly on top of your opponents, it is going to deal the maximum amount of damage based off of where the other active area from that hit tends to be. There does tend to be minimal damage as she gets further away from her target, and may be able to catch some of your opponents off guard. But the best application for that is if you are able to place yourself right above your opponent. However, you don't see Elektra getting a lot of use out of her falling aerial because she does not have an ability that places her in an airborne state that would be advantageous to use. If you can find an opportunity for it, it's not the worst option in her kit. However, it's not the most opportune item either. And finally, we have the block and dodge animation, which has Elektra crossing her arms, though she does orient her hands a little bit differently as what we've seen from most of the cast, and those Psis extend downward for a little bit more damage blocking. Of course, that's purely aesthetics, because it doesn't provide additional damage mitigation as compared to other members of the cast, but it is a nice design based off of how the character works and functions. And then as you input a direction to maneuver away from incoming harm, Elektra does execute a roll in that direction. So let's talk a little bit about Elektra's abilities. First off, we have a move that looks like it comes right out of Street Fighter. I get very heavy Chun-Li vibes looking at this particular attack. And that is, of course, the lethal ballet, where she will perform a forward spiraling kick motion where she sticks both of her legs out and twirls around in that forward trajectory. And that is a very quintessential attack that is performed by Chun-Li, but it does make sense for Elektra as well to a certain extent, as she is one of those more nimble combatants. However, she doesn't levitate off of the ground for nearly as long as the quintessential attack from Chun-Li tends to be. That's enough Street Fighter talk for today, though. The biggest things to note about this attack for Elektra is it is one of her more consistent damage dealers, having an A classification to the damage that it deals with a C classification to the energy points that it consumes. It is not a great attack in the realm of stagger damage that it's capable of dealing, only having a D classification, mainly due to the fact that she doesn't remain stationary for this attack. I've found that that really tends to hold a bearing into those type of attacks that aren't more directly targeted, but it serves its purpose for what it is. The attack has the melee attack type and the area assault synergy trait, and as all of Elektra's abilities are ranked up, they benefit from a reduced energy point cost, an increase to attack damage, an increase to stagger damage dealt, and finally that reduced chance of the attack being interrupted. Elektra's second ability is the explosive assault. We've seen a couple of attacks that have this type of form, and from the ones that we've seen, I definitely prefer the one that is possessed by Psylocke, as you are allowed to and encouraged to repeatedly spam that attack and layer these out one after the other. You still can do that with the kunai that are thrown out by Elektra, but it doesn't have the same effect, and you can't get as many of them active on the battlefield as Psylocke is capable of doing. These kunai do have timed explosives, and they will detonate a few seconds after landing in the ground. They are thrown out in a fan-type shape, and Elektra will propel herself backward a small amount to create some distance between that attack and her opponents. Though the biggest source of the damage from this attack does, of course, come from the actual explosion, not the strike that happens from the kunai being thrown. This attack has the energy attack type and the explosive synergy trait, and has some fairly modest stats, having a B classification to damage, a C classification to energy point consumption, and a C classification to the stagger damage dealt. Elektra's third ability is the lackluster one of the group in terms of damage capacity and utilization. It is the throwing stars, which is interesting that they didn't just call it shurikens, because that's very much what they are. And this involves flinging a series of shurikens in the direction that the character is facing. You can hold this button to continue attacking instead of mashing it, And as you hold down that button, you can also influence the direction in which Elektra is throwing out these shurikens, but only out in front of where the character's facing. She does not have a 360-degree rotation of where you can throw them. They don't have a lot of damage application, though it is one of the few ranged options that Elektra possesses, which you don't want to write it off completely, but for a character that's based mainly around melee type attacks, it can serve as counterintuitive to her intended playstyle. This attack is of the projectile variety and has the rapid fire synergy trait and possesses the C classification to damage and energy point consumption while having a very low rating to stagger damage dealt with a very lackluster E rating there. Elektra's fourth and final ability is the Psi Strike, and this is a powerful forward lunging attack using her size, and you can hold this button to charge it up as well as pick a direction in which you will be unleashing the attack. Now, if you use this attack in a synergy type setting, it will be at its maximum efficiency. It will also take place directly in the direction that Elektra is facing at the time that the synergy is selected. However, compared to a lot of other charge type attacks of this nature, it has a very limited range. It feels very, very short compared to a lot of other charge type attacks from other members of the roster. However, it is Elektra's best option when it comes to dealing stagger damage, as it has an A classification to the damage it deals there and maintains a C classification to standard damage dealt, as well as the energy points consumed to use this ability. And this ability has the piercing attack type and the charge synergy trait. Elektra's extreme attack, it's functional. I don't love the animation for it, though it is faithful to the character. It involves a series of close-up slashes with her twin Psis, and as you are initiating that first part of the attack, it does appear that you can momentarily influence where she's going, though it's not ability breaking by any means. And the attack does culminate with a larger series of those explosive kunai being thrown out into a hexagonal type pattern before they all explode rapidly out in front of the character in the direction that she is facing. She does move around a little bit while using this attack, so she can close a little bit of ground, and if the AI is left to its own devices, she can course correct marginally, and then the large amount of explosion damage that happens at the end will be considerably out and far away from where she physically finishes that attack. So it's not the greatest attack to use against boss type characters, though if you are using your extreme attacks for crowd control purposes, then this attack will certainly have an increased efficiency there. Though most of the extreme attacks are meant to be multi-purpose, this one leans a lot more heavily into the crowd control aspect. However, it is a very quick attack, having the full animation take place in just over 3.5 seconds before Elektra is rendered actionable again and can continue laying waste to her opponents. So now it's time for us to determine where Elektra belongs in this character tier list that we've been putting together. And though she is good, I don't feel like she's great. There's a lot of things that she's really kind of lacking in terms of being a top tier character, and a lot of that comes down to her damage output consistency. I know that her abilities are quite faithful to her own character, but the ranged abilities that she have a lot of variability to them and ultimately are what bring this character down a couple of notches on this overall list. So she falls well out of the scope of S tier, and I would even say A tier is a bit of a far cry for what she's capable of. And though I wish that she were better in certain aspects, she still has a lot of utility to her, to the point where you don't want to write her off completely. And as I'm looking at the characters that we have ranked here, I feel that at this point in time she belongs right here in between Iron Fist and Gamora. And that means that I've got a lot of characters that I need to move around in order to make sure that I can place her there. And Spider-Man, I'm sorry, but you don't get to hang out on that top row anymore, especially due to the fact that you take up a lot of space there. But what do you think of my rating and ranking of Elektra? Do you feel like there's anything that I overlooked or should have taken into consideration a little bit more closely? Do you feel like she's been oversold or undercut? Make sure that you let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. And we'll be back next week with our breakdown for Loki, who I'm very excited to talk about. If you're not watching that TV show on Disney Plus, make sure that you're doing that because it is phenomenal. And with all that being said, thanks so much for your time, and I hope that you have an absolutely fantastic rest of your day.